遊びテック
Is bigger better in relation to video games? Just to make that entirely clear, if anyone is slightly lost. My name is TristaBytes, and I am here with Kwang from Asobi Tech, and we are going to be asking all the hot take questions about games and size.
Yeah, it's coming to the media recently. Various games are either too big, too small, too expensive, not expensive enough. It's a heated debate at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. I think we're seeing a lot of discourse at the moment on social media around games and how many hours they have and whether or not that's value for money. And at which point most people turn around and say, what about things like Stray? What about those things that have really made a big impact that have a shorter gameplay length? Is their cost too expensive for the number of hours involved?
As a game developer, I have very strong opinions about this. As a small game developer of a small team, I have even more stronger opinions about this. Our game's too big.
I like the way he's just straight in there like, I am not going to give both sides of this argument. Which makes me someone that's going to have to slightly play devil's advocate in this particular case.
I also see it very much from a consumer's point of view as well, because the consumer's perception at the moment, as far as I can tell, is bigger is better. I want more hours for my money.
Yeah, but combined with the exact same people arguing that there's too many fetch quests and that there's too much repetition in games, it is a very kind of interesting thing to see as a discourse, especially on social media, where people are like, I want my game to be about 6,000 hours long, but I don't want to pay more than 30 quid, and I don't want any of it to be repetitive.
That's the thing, if you're saying, I want a game that's 6,000 hours long, that sounds like a good value for money.
It does in theory, doesn't it?
It does. But how many fetch quests have you done where you've had to go from point A, one side of the map, point B on the other side of the map, only to return back to point A?
Yeah, I always figured that if I wanted to be an Uber Eats delivery person, that I would do that in real life and get paid for it. The idea of me paying to do that has always filmed a little bit like a false economy to me.
The thing is, you can make it interesting. You can make it fun. You can make the journey an experience. But there are so many games out there now that it feels like a chore. It's a big thing in game design where you need to respect your player, respect your player's time.
I saw a really good TikTok the other week. I've forgotten the creator's name, embarrassingly, but it was a comedy sketch, and it was somebody walking up to an NPC and saying, hey, you got a quest for me, mate? There's a diamond above your head. And the NPC goes, I do. A really important quest. And they get a tombola, and they go, I need 25. And then they roll a dice, and they go, wood. And that is sort of how you start to feel with some of these larger games. You feel like, right, this is just now completely random. What is this adding to the story? What is this adding to the actual world building other than just clocking up those extra hours? And I can imagine as a game developer, because I'm coming from the point of view, I play games. I've done a bit of voice acting, but I'm not creating the games from scratch. And I'm a Twitch partner, so I'm playing these games. But as a developer, the pressure, I'm guessing, to make additional content that is beyond the range of the story you want to tell or the gameplay mechanic you want to explore, that must get pretty frustrating.
It does, for sure. When we go to publish our games, the publisher will ask you, so how many hours in your game? And I don't know, I think maybe 3, 4, 5, if a push. You could replay it a few times if you want, but the main story is maybe 4 or 5 hours long. And when you put that on paper and on the box or in the review, it mentally puts a value on your game. And when you want to charge 30, 40 pounds for a game on physical, it's really hard to compete to the games that say, hey, our game is 60 hours long for the same price.
Yeah, and I think there's something that people forget, because I hear a lot of discourse about the price of games and people saying, £60 for a game? What is this? And I'm there going, I saved up about £60, about £1 a week, to go buy Mortal Kombat 3 on the Mega Drive, right? When you take into account inflation, I was ripped off. But I also needed to get that game because I had the Mega Drive version and it had blood in. But nevertheless, that was my value for money. But nowadays, games aren't really as more expensive as I think people seem to perceive them to be. I think with a lot of free-to-play games out there and those offering endless amounts of hours, it's really kind of slightly squiffed our opinion on what value for money is with our gameplay.
I've definitely seen in the mobile market especially, there's been a race to the bottom where games, unless the game is free for your mobile, people won't even look at it, which is a damn shame because there's some amazing games that are $2.99, $3.99, $4.99 on the mobile. But we had the same thing happen into Steam as well. Games are racing to the bottom because they want to be free, because they want to be seen, and the only way they can be seen is because they're free. But you're missing out on games that have a cost attached to them, which is a few quid. So as someone who grew up poor as a kid on the ZX Spectrum, I may have acquired games in whichever way I could.
Cassette tape copiers.
That never happened. It did, but it didn't happen. But as a developer, I would never begrudge someone obtaining my game however they could, if that's the only way they could do it. That way they're playing it. People who don't pay for your game are never going to pay for your game, regardless of what measures you put in place to try and stop them doing that. All you can do is enable them to play your game and spread the word best you can. So the cost of games is, I remember buying budget games for $1.99 and $2.99 at the cassette tapes, and then a full price game would be $9.99, and then a
I think we're aging ourselves a little bit here.
That's fine. And then fast forward a little bit further, I bought Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo for £65.
Worth it.
Totally worth it. I spent so many hours in that game, it's ridiculous. But if it was measured by today's standards, it would ask you, how long is the one-player campaign in Street Fighter 2? It's about 30 minutes. If you saw this new fighting game coming out, and it's a 30-minute game, are you likely to buy it?
For 65 quid.
For 65 quid.
Yeah. And I think as well, we used to just play those games endlessly. You look at any of the Sonic games, the 16-bit Sonic games, and you can play those through happily, you know, at a leisurely pace in like an hour or so. But you'd play it like 500 times. And nowadays, I think with so many games on the market and so much availability for these games, especially with all these additional free-to-play games and very cheaply accessed games, people have thousands and thousands of games, and they're almost thinking like, right, I'm only going to play this once, so I need the most amount of hours possible and the most value possible. But equally, I'm going to end up with 700 of them in my Steam game playlist that I've never even opened. And it makes it a very complicated bit of mental gymnastics to figure out, are you really getting value from all these games that you're never playing?
Yeah, so quick question. Who has a Steam library with over 100 games just waiting to be played? Yeah.
Yeah, the rest of them just aren't admitting it.
It seems like you just collect games. You don't play them, you just collect them because they're cheap on sale or whatever. It's a damn shame because if you look around us now, there's like hundreds of games here being shown, and I would probably realistically maybe play a handful of them in my time. There are too many games to be played. I can't play them all. I want to play them all, but I can't.
Yeah. I've mentioned TikTok twice already here. I sound very hip and cool for someone that very isn't. I made a TikTok the other week, which was basically just kind of like, oh yes, brand new game I want to play, Steam sale, replaying Sonic 2 on the Mega Drive again, even though I have 500 games I haven't played left. Because I'm still getting, in some ways, better value for money for that copy of Sonic the Hedgehog 2 that came back in with my Mega Drive 2 than some of these modern games that I've picked up for free and things, because I'm still replaying that. I'm still putting the hours into that. Replayability has, in some ways, started to be forgotten, I feel, in the gaming industry.
Talking about the value of games, show of hands, who thinks that games are too expensive at the moment? Okay.
Yeah, it's about 50-50. It's not too bad.
All right. Well, let me ask, the game that you're thinking about, think of the most expensive game that you could buy. Think about how much it costs. But then think about how many people it took to make that game, how many years it took to make that game, and then how much that would cost. And how do you offset that cost? Yes, a game may cost £60, but if it took 300 people to make in 3 years,
And I also think as well that because we have so many free games now, and because we have so many of these online games with a million made with a random tombola of assortment, fetch quests, side quests, bumping up the hours of them, I think we've slightly forgotten the relative comparisons for that. It's like, we're here in London. One of these £60 games, that's like 3 pints at a standard London bar, right, at this point in time. That's a couple of pizzas from your local pizzeria. It isn't actually that much, but we've started to lose the feeling that that is a fair price for a game. Whereas actually, when you look at other things, the cost of other things, they've gone up a lot more with inflation or with demand and things than games, I feel.
Yeah, so as consumers of games, I really want people to think about what it takes to make a game and the cost of that. As you said, if I went to buy coffee now, it would cost me £5, even £10 to buy coffee. But if I went to go to buy a game for my phone, I would have to think twice for spending more than £3 on a game. And there's a serious problem there with a disconnect.
Definitely, and especially since some of these smaller games, these like, it's £1.50 for a game, it's literally less than said coffee, and it's taken somebody 3 years of their life and their devotion, versus like the person who is probably, unfortunately, unfairly paid minimum wage to make your overpriced coffee. There is a lot more love that went into that game, but we are perceiving anything above zero, in some cases, as too expensive to pay for a game.
If you look over behind us on that side, there's the indie area, and there are a million wonderful indie games out there. People made them with love, people made them in their spare time that they could find, and spent years making them, and they've crafted them, and they asked for a few pounds. I don't know, top of my head, I think the most expensive indie game I can think of is maybe £30. But even £30 is a small price to pay for someone's crafted, curated creation.
I can see your pain.
It hurts.
Being filmed in 4K for posterity.
But yeah, I want consumers to think about the cost of games and what it costs to make the game and what they're paying for it. Because I know it's easy to want a good bargain. It's human nature to want a sale or want something cheaper. But what is the cost of that?
And I think as well, looking at those games that do have endless open amounts of hours, those games like, you know, World of Warcraft, these other online games that we have at the moment, part of the reasons that those maintain their value and part of the reasons that those have so many hours of work is because actually what you're paying for there, what you're experiencing there, is more about community, is more about meeting up with your friends in the game and doing those quests, doing those dungeons. Obviously, you're quite often repleting your dailies and things like Destiny, and a lot of it is about community. And when you're dealing with some of these smaller games, indie games, or single-player experiences, by putting up the extra hours, but not having a bunch of your mates there who you're just using to like nick their equipment and stuff, or you know, being the healer and hanging around at the back and doing everything other than healing them, you're taking away that community element, which really just makes some of those longer games feel bloated because they're missing the component that gives those extra hours the value.
Yeah, exactly that. I'm going to have to call out Red Dead Redemption 2 for a game that wastes my time a lot. It's a huge game, and it's wonderful, it's beautiful, and there's some great things, but there's so much time wasted going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And respect the player's time. Please respect the player's time.
That's why we have fast travel, isn't it? It's like the one thing from games we want in real life is fast travel, to get from one place to another place without having to use the London Underground. And then in games, we're kind of like, what? No, I wish to walk very slowly from A to B. I want it to take 5 hours. And I want to pick up said item, and I want it to come back to me. In real life, we pay money for Amazon Prime, so we don't have to do that. And it's an interesting kind of dichotomy in what people want in real life versus what they sort of seem to expect nowadays from games versus what we expected from games sort of in the sort of 70s, 80s, and 90s, where we expected to finish the game in an hour and then play the exact same game again, when it was more kind of based on arcadey experiences.
So, for those who don't know, I run a small studio called Sobitech, and we make games for the Game Boy, because that's hip and trendy in 2022.
Retro's in, we're not just old.
But when you make a game for the Game Boy, at the moment, we're lucky because I can make a game now on a 2 megabyte cartridge. 2 megabytes.
Yeah. It's unbelievable to think about that. I know. 2 megs.
When you think about most Game Boy games back in the early days were 64 kilobytes. Super Mario Land is 64 kilobytes. Tetris is 32 kilobytes for the whole game. But I get to make games with 2 megabytes. So is bigger better?
I mean, I'm not sure I'd describe 2 megs as large in any way, shape, or form, but relatively speaking, it is a lot more data and a lot more room to play with when you're making things like a Game Boy game. However, what I have seen, and one of the things that often draws me towards indie games, that draws me towards those things that are not necessarily those AAA titles, is putting constraints upon someone's design process, giving them some limits on what they can do, be it budget, be it time, be it the mechanics or the space on the physical media that you're working with. That can force creativity, that can force you to think of ideas you wouldn't have thought of if you just had endless amounts of budget. And I sometimes liken this to British TV is probably the best thing I can think of. There is something charming, wonderful, and lovely about Doctor Who, and about Blackadder, and about Red Dwarf, and about those shows. And I don't think those shows would be as funny or as good if they weren't working to a budget of about £2.50 an episode. Red Dwarf filmed all of their corridor scenes in the lighting gantries of the BBC using some red lights and a lack of health and safety, right? And those scenes are funny. Those limited scenes, those limited amount of staff, things really condensed it in. So all of the humor is in the dialogue. All the humor is in that character interaction. When you have more money and more budget, it sometimes doesn't aid creativity, which I'm assuming you feel as well. You've stuck with Game Boy for a reason, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm a big fan of game jams. Game jams give you a limitation in time and resources to make a game in a short time, and that's some of the most creative stuff I've seen come out of game jams. I'm going to go back to AAA games. I remember not playing my PS4 for a while. I turned it on the other day, put on Spider-Man because it's a wonderful game, and it said, update. I didn't get to play any games that day. The PS4 had to update itself, then Spider-Man had to update, so I didn't play any games that day, and it was sad.
I think that definitely is another thing with endless iteration can be great. With big online worlds, it can be awesome to have new content added in, and that's where kind of with those big online games, you do get that added value. But yeah, you do also have the turn on Xbox, go make cup of tea, go make dinner, go visit your neighbors, come back, still cannot play game. And we did grow up, especially for ourselves, where you put the cartridge in, maybe you had to take it out, turn it off and on again a few times, but once that cartridge was in there, you had your game, it was a singular entity, it loaded, and it just played.
So the spark of this conversation we're having was the news on Stray.
Yeah.
Stray had just come out. Stray's a wonderful game. If you haven't played it yet, go check it out. It's great. But the game is about 6-7 hours long, if I remember correctly. And a lot of people were complaining that it was too short. They paid a bunch of money for Stray, and they thought they wanted more Stray, which is wonderful that they want more Stray because they liked it.
Yeah.
But Stray was already delayed by 1 year. If you wanted more content, it's going to take more time to make, more money to make. Then if they had delayed it another year, you would have got more content. The price probably would have gone up to pay for that extra year of development, and people would be complaining about that too.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if you go to the movies, you go to the cinema, that's an experience, and it's costing, like, again, we are in London, so sometimes 20, 25 quid. You want to go to an IMAX, want a nice seat, you may need to sell a kidney. And those movies, you go to a movie, they used to be 90 minutes, now sometimes they're Lord of the Rings, but regardless, they have a limited time on them, and they are also a limited experience. But people will rewatch the same movies, I have watched people who, they will watch, especially the Lord of the Rings movies, back to back to back. That's a weekend event. That's a thing we do. You will boot up your old Xbox, and we used to just go and play the first Halo game, start to finish. And then you give it a few weekends later, you go, yeah, I fancy doing that again. And we just do that again. I don't see, well, people do say the cinema is a bit expensive, but they don't not watch movies and not buy movies because they are limited. If the film was too long and just contained filler, if there are filler episodes in TV series, you get lists online of which episodes to skip of a TV series because they're just filler. It's like about 40% of Bleach if you watch anime. And You have that, but with games, people really see the opposite. It's like they want more filler.
Well, that's the thing. If you want a 100-hour game, I can make you a 100-hour game. It'll be boring as hell, but I could make 100 for 100 hours.
Yeah, it's like, do you want all killer, no filler? This was supposed to be like a debate, but we're both just absolutely on the same side here. But it is like, yeah, do you want the greatest hits, or do you want the B-sides that nobody wanted?
Sometimes I like B-sides, to be honest. Sometimes.
All right, that doesn't help my point. You're just now undermining me when I'm backing you up.
Debate.
On the wrong topic. Aside from Krang's poor taste in music, or slightly hipster taste in music, because he likes to like the B-sides instead of the greatest hits, you still need to have those key notes. You need to have, like, if a band is doing a tour, right, and they don't play that one track everyone wants to listen to, there will be riots. There will absolutely be riots. If they just played, like, we're just going to play our acoustic B-sides album, no one will be interested in that. People are there because they want to hit certain beats, they want to hit certain points. That's part of the experience they're looking for. And in games, if you are making a longer game, it becomes a bit harder to curate those experiences, to create the pace of the game, and to make sure you're just keeping in your best ideas. Editing is a good thing for books. Editing is a good thing for movies, and it's a good thing for games.
Yeah, talking about other forms of media, I think games are one of these forms of media where it's very disconnected from the rest of the media. The value of it, how it's made, how it's consumed, and it feels so disconnected. But games is just another form, another art form. It's actually, for me, it's the ultimate art form. It's the bringing together of art, music, and everything else, and making it interactive as well. So it's like, for me, everything put together. But we don't see it in the same value as other art forms.
No, possibly because it's such a newer art form, and because it draws on other ones. As you say, there is art, there is music, there is storytelling, and it's still very much an evolving art form as well. And it means that people just haven't viewed it the same way because it is so much a newer medium, I think.
Yeah, games is probably about, I'm going to say, 40 years old, maybe 50 years at a push, video games. You think something like, reckon 50? 50 sounds right. And movies and TV are a little bit older, and books go further in the back, and obviously art goes further than that.
Yeah, and I think definitely when you look at other media, we hold them in a very different regard. If someone didn't have an editor for their book, and there were like 500 pages of bump in the middle of it, I remember studying random memory. I remember studying the Woman in White in English literature in A-levels. Wow. And the person who wrote that, it's held in this high regard. I was reading it thinking, this is he spent 5 pages describing this woman's hair. I wish I was exaggerating. Why is this? Why did no one stop this? But it turned out he was paid per chapter, and it was published in a serial that came out each month. He was literally filling it to make the book bigger. And then I had to study it, and I'm still salty about that.
We need to wrap up because it's the last talk and the last day, and we should go home.
We should probably go home and continue ranting about this without taking up anyone else's time. Yeah, we hope that this has been an interesting kind of look into is bigger better with games. If you're a game developer, hopefully you felt a little bit of solidarity with the things we're saying. And yeah, if you have any questions or any counterpoints, you are welcome to either chat to us after or message us on social medias. And yeah, put forward your arguments. Is bigger better?
Thank you very much.
遊びテック